to our 5th Salon. Architecture for Humanity Denver is a relatively young chapter of Architecture for Humanity, so we've been kind of seeking our way. In the last few years, we've stumbled upon a handful of really interesting community projects, and under Terra's guidance in this last year, really decided that in partnership with acting and with action and with going through these projects to try and help the community, we also had a responsibility to take a step back and to think about what we were provoking.
So if we could just start with you, Todd, set the table a little bit. You work for the city, you're a former planner. North Denver Cornerstone Collaborative, for those who don't know, what's the vision, what's the mission?
So the collaborative was established, as Terra mentioned, in January by the mayor. He appointed Kelly Lead as the leader, and the notion was to bring together all of the 6 projects that she mentioned. And I call them projects, but they're really at very different levels of study and planning and implementation. And it was intended to basically address all those complicated projects up in this part of the city. And to be fairly frank, it was a part of the city that has been fairly neglected for about the past 50 years or so. And it's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation now. CDOT had been going forward with I-70 for 10 years, or if not longer, but a lot of the other initiatives were just starting to get started, and everyone started to realize that there was a need to kind of align these projects or start to coordinate them together in some way, and to think about how to do that collectively. So that's why he established the collaborative. It's part of his bigger vision for the corridor of opportunity, as he calls it, from the airport and DIA and everything going out there all the way down to downtown itself with Denver Union Station at the other end of the dumbbell. And that's the kind of way we've talked about it. And when you look at it, it's got a huge variety of kind of commercial uses along it. It's got major infrastructure elements, both with I-70 and the airport at one end, and all the transit lines coming into it. So it's a huge spine, actually, for the city itself. So he established the collaborative as a way to kind of bring together the 6 projects that were mentioned. Kelly kind of ran independent until about August, and then he pulled myself in and one other person as a part of his team. So we're, as I joke, we're a small but mighty team of 3 now. So we're not like a department within the city or a huge division. We are 3 people right now. And the way we currently work is to basically coordinate both internally and externally all these efforts and projects. So we internally rely heavily on cross-departmental integration and those things, and externally we work hard with the community and council and so on and so forth. So that's kind of our role. The vision for the area, honestly, is still being worked out to a certain degree, in many degrees. It's unlike any other planning project you can think of for a number of reasons. One is, like I said, some projects, such as the neighborhood plans, are still at the 30,000 foot level. They're still defining their vision. Other projects, like Brighton Boulevard, for instance, is at a much lower level where they're trying to talk about design of the road itself. So it's unlike a lot of other kind of planning or urban design projects in that way. They have things at different scales right now. And the other part to it that's very different, if you think about Denver, we actually have, I think, a very good track record of kind of building confidence in areas where we can actually transform parts of the city. Thanks to leadership years ago, the vision for the valley was established, and you're seeing the fruits of that labor now. Stapleton, for instance, moving the airport out to where it is currently, and then redoing Stapleton the way it's done was a huge success project, and then Lowry and other ones. This one is a completely different animal. First of all, it's larger than any of those from a geographic point of view, and second of all, you're going into areas that have existing neighborhoods, existing communities, and then transforming communities. So it's not truly a master planning effort in the classic sense. So that's kind of part of our approach that we're taking on, is how do you retain this diversity and this kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of salable approach, this pluralism, but yet allow for those projects to kind of nurture some comprehensive solutions that benefit all.
A lot of people are starting to say, what can we do to address social equity problems and vast extremes where you have a CEO making 350 times the lowest wage earner. On a personal level, I'm not philosophically interested in closing that bandwidth as much as I am raising the whole bandwidth. But underlying questions about neighborhood and gentrification are questions of social power and the ability that some people feel perhaps they don't even have to engage these discussions and challenge city leaders and challenge CDOT and others. What would you say to, having been from the city side, what would you say to people who say, listen, this isn't right for our neighborhood, I have a voice, I want to stand up, but I don't know the means of being able to articulate that, to engage in a discussion.
But to your bigger question about social equity and gentrification, I mean, it would be naive to sit here and say anybody has a solution to gentrification. It's a valid concern. It's a concern in any city. And it's a concern citywide in a city where we have a set boundary, right? We're not going to grow, we're not going to annex more land, and we don't want to become Detroit. So we're going to become more desirable as a city over time, right? And housing prices are going to go up. Job market's going to be more competitive. So certainly it's going to be a challenge in these areas. And I think one of our techniques or strategies is to begin the conversation now over the next year and not think we have the answer. Okay, here's one of the answers, because it's not that simple. And to begin that conversation and continue it and get input from the community. So that's one of our kind of
there's two approaches. One is a very benevolent kind of philosopher king approach where we have an inclusive model, everybody's included, we want everybody's best interest. And the problem with that is that it's often perceived as patronizing and patrician and almost insidiously imperial. We're going to take you over, but we're going to pretend to co-opt your actual interests. But what's happening, whether it's Curtis Park or Rhino or any other neighborhood where you just kept sweeping poor classes out to the outskirts, is there a way, and it really gets to the core, it's not just the built environment, it's not just design, it's really the core of education, the prison system, and social equity. And on your macro level, are you able to really dig deep into some of those entrenched human struggles in order to really find ways to bring populations into gentrification where it's mutually beneficial rather than conquering or pushing aside?
Yeah, and Drew brought up a great point. I think that's what we'll do is start to look at some of the best building blocks they have to prevent that, which is the home ownership. That's one of the elements that actually prevent a lot or can help, keep in check gentrification. Rhino's a different monster because there is not really
sort of Wild West.
Well, it's an older industrial area. You remember that the population that's moving in there. I mean, some of the artists who are in the room are from Rhino. I think are some of the pioneers who were out there first, but nonetheless, they pretty much went into an industrial zone. So it wasn't like it was an established neighborhood.
Tracy
so that one is very. So Rhino's very different. I think Illyria, Swansea, and Global are actually have a lot more kind of solid base there to build from, and our notion is to nurture that, right? So one of the tools that we will have, and this is a very crude tool but a powerful one, is through the planning process we will go through and confirm and hopefully expand in some ways the areas of stability, okay, of the residential stock in those areas through our planning process and the neighborhood plans. That kind of makes sure that that area gets preserved, and you can't then come in and change it over time easily. It becomes very, very difficult, and it keeps those neighborhoods established. And then we build on the home ownership piece to try to retain or expand home ownership in the area.
Yeah.
Like Drew said, the number is actually 65%, is my understanding. It's 60 to 65% home ownership up in those neighborhoods, which is higher than all the neighborhoods in the city.
Regarding the home ownership piece and how important the neighborhood planning process, and I can speak more about the Groveville neighborhood planning process.
So you're a former resident there?
Yes.
You're living where now?
I live in Athmar Park, which is just south of Alameda. And that process thus far has, we've actually been able to have conversations about, well, what do we want 45th Avenue to look like, which is our historic commercial corridor through the neighborhood. It's the bike route, it's where we have existing storefronts, and property ownership. And so through the neighborhood planning process, residents have identified, and we identified the areas that we want to preserve. So, this collaboration of identifying that housing stock and identifying, what is appropriate as far as, architectural context goes, has been crucial to the global planning process. And additionally, residents are trying to take measures to situate themselves so that they can continue to be homeowners and continue to pass their homes on to their families and keep them in their possession. And there was an effort last fall in Globeville focused on 45th Avenue that Groundwork Denver helped support the merchants there and support residents in finding ways to make their buildings more energy efficient. So the buildings on 45th Avenue are old, outdated, and so with a little bit of support from Groundwork Denver and their peers, they then invested their own time and money into other improvements to help to try and situate themselves and kind of prepare for these improvements that are moving up the river, but it's downstream.
Often it seems planners and others get in the weeds when it comes to existing structural constraints in the city. When you have the supreme luxury of saying, what do you do when you can build anything from the ground up, from scratch, and make it beautiful and efficient and sustainable and wonderful? Studio Completiva, which you were an senior associate at Studio Completiva, is one of my favorite firms. The very favorite development that I have is Museum of Contemporary Art. And you guys know the area that's the museum and the Falcone residence, then the art house townhomes. That little stretch right there is, to me, the most beautiful little oasis in the city. To some degree, you have the luxury of building anything that you want. What do you build when you can bring a competition of 10 extraordinary world architects and choose David Adjaye? What's the difference between designing for a developed, pre-gentrified function of the city like Lodo or Central Platte Valley versus tackling major constraints in outlook?
Well, that's kind of a hard comparison to make, because that was really the master planning of a block, which had kind of a whole, that was kind of my first project at Studio Completiva, was Monarch Mills, and that in itself, that was very, very complicated. The building, the one high-rise was basically came about by, there was a deal made with, I guess, all of the developers and planners for the Central Platte Valley, that all of the affordable housing, I mean, you guys all know that when you build 30 units or more, you have to provide affordable housing. That's why you see a lot of townhomes with 29 units, so that all the affordable housing could be built in one building in the Central Platte Valley, and there was East-West Partners and Urban Ventures and several other developers and planners came about continuing to do that, so that now the rest of the Central Platte Valley can develop pretty much without affordable housing. But this is kind of one of the things that drove that master plan. So that within that block, it's very diverse. I mean, we had that entire building of, I can't remember, 70-some units. All but the top floor were affordable housing. Now, affordable housing itself is a little controversial. It doesn't really serve. The joke is you can't afford it, but it's better than. I think one of the things that our work has tried to do, or one of the things when I was on the housing committee at AIA, is affordable housing really is sustainability itself. That you have to have working people able to live in the city. If you force working people to commute to work, that's really a very unsustainable thing, and it's really like a tax that you're putting on them, just having to have a car. I mean, there's been studies shown that if you don't need a car, you have much more disposable income. So a lot of Studio Completativa's work and my work and is we're very dedicated to making sure there is affordable housing within the city. So that little community, and then you have like Mark Falcone's house and at that time some of the most expensive townhomes in the city. So you have kind of little microcosm of a very diverse world within that block.
One
So
of the
it's-
interesting things that comes out of that, related to the question of equity, is the notion of democracy. Is democracy, plurality, inclusiveness, and hearing all voices, is that a genuinely beneficial thing to do for a society, or is it just good for the people who have a lower voice? I would say it's possible that you can make a conservative argument that democracy and the dynamic around plural voices, and including affordable housing, for example, in those populations, leads to a kind of dynamism in a culture that you can't get. It's like a democracy versus a monarchy or something. To have artists, to have students, to have working people in a community, and not just the well-heeled.
I think that's what you want. I mean, we could go in that direction of sort of why diversity and why it's important to have like a diverse demographic within the city. But I was going to say, part of democracy to me is just the ability of people to determine their own future and have a say in their own future. And I think that extends to the level of planning. You know, that it doesn't happen from above. And that's why I think the global responsive plans, you know, it really, if you go to these meetings, it's really, in a way, it's very moving because you see people really participating. The planners at the city, I think, Todd, are doing terrific, fantastic, because they're really engaging people and they really make them feel like we're determining our own future. There's a lot of cynicism and there's a lot of skepticism because some of these people they've had promises made and broken over the years, and there's some of that. But I think like people have to have choices. But one of the things I've noticed in the planning process is that with lay people, they don't have they don't understand everything planners and architects do. They don't have like a physical or a visual sense all the time. And so, you know, there's kind of a learning process that they have to learn and they have to feel engaged in it.
Is we've got two major highways that have had a lot of work done on them, being 270 between I-76 and I-70. They've spent a lot of money on that stretch of road the last 10 years, and it's a nice stretch of road. And then the whole conversation about what to do with I-70 becomes, how can we make the fourth largest urban infill project that we've seen in this very city in the last 20 years?
Yeah, it comes back to
a great opportunity. And it doesn't appear to me that it would take an arm and a leg of money to make those two legs of a triangle be the triangle instead of having I-70 where it is currently.
Gets back to our programming a couple months ago about I-70. John Prosser, expert, came in and talked about
that.
Talked about the cut and
I'm
cover.
gonna keep
and
bringing it up because it's like, no, you know, in Swansea, I don't want to see I-70 there anymore. I want to see it.
But what I was going to continue to say was, it seems to be a metaphor for the vivisection of a neighborhood, doesn't it? For just slicing something in half and disconnecting family from family, brother against brother. You know, it's like this giant wide chasm between an existing and formerly tightly knit community, and it's just a great metaphor for what's really happening to these communities.
Wow. The whole suggestion, I think, of taking out I-70 between 270 and 76, I think this is a great discussion. I really wish this discussion had started 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. And Richard, I think we said, I'm at the point of that AIA meeting, you know, it's 11:59.
I know.
And the other thing is CDOT has fought this tooth and nail, and I don't quite know why. There's a number of reasons why I just can't see that gaining legs. Number one is that has to be sold to Adams County. And Adams County and Denver are not on good terms politically, in case you don't know. You know, like and this just looks like you're pushing our problem onto us. I mean, and so Another reason, and Ron Straka made this point to me, is okay, so you take down I-7, and then you widen 270 and 76. This is my fear. All that, Ron Straka says, all that Denver's left with is rubble. And Denver will have to rebuild that. And this is a serious problem. Who's going to reconstruct that and create the wonderful, beautiful Denver Boulevard that some, I mean, I'm not
I'll give you that
saying.
answer. Every developer that knows they can get that land. That's who.
Well, this is another thing, Richard, is everybody talks like, if this is so attractive, what's really mysterious is none of these developers, and we could go through the names, will come forward. They'll all say behind the scenes, oh, great idea, yeah, look at all that land to develop. I mean, this is like 40% the size of Stapleton if you took out I-7. But it just is not gaining legs. And I happen to know, because we're pretty attuned to the political establishment, there is nobody at the city that wants anything to do that. We've gone to our councilwoman, Judy Montero, she won't.
Nobody that's got the authority to be a decision maker.
Right.
Wants anything to do with it.
There's a tool that has been used once or twice in Denver, community benefit agreements, and I'm just wondering if any of those have been talked about in the Louisville, the GES area. The Crest organization did one along the West Rail line. And are you familiar with these at all? Community benefit agreements? So the big ones that you may have heard about, one is the Staples Center in LA and the other one is the Atlantic Yards development in Brooklyn. And so whenever a big development is going to happen, you can get a community benefit agreement signed so that the developer has to give X number of jobs to the community and affordable housing, and you know, it really involves the community quite a bit. I think there have been about 70 or so done in the country, and legally they haven't ever been tested. So, you know, there's still a kind of a new tool that's being used, but I know the organization Frest has been involved in doing one on the West Carolina, so that might be something to look at for the area.
Yeah, I mean, there are no big developments right now. I mean, as far as, you know, the projects we talked about mostly infrastructure based, so you could build some of that maybe into those procurement processes, you know, and some of these are still at plan level, so we don't have a project yet. Those are more redevelopment initiatives. I think there was one, Denver Union Station, I believe, may have had one, and I think the previous plans for the former Gates Rubber Factory had a similar one that was on my Frest, and those were both development projects. So I think when we get to that point, you know,
This could be a tool that
could be, yeah, maybe.
Which is helpful because there's been a lot of talk that, okay, so we've got this neighborhood plan, well, when is it all going to be implemented? And, you know, within the neighborhood plan, residents want to see this discussion of tools. So, thank you.
Any, sir?
Yeah, I just wonder, one of the main issues with certainly North Denver is access to downtown, and one of the main barriers to that is the railroad. How do you get them to the table or get them involved?
We don't have enough money in our coffers to negotiate with them. Well, I think it's less about getting them involved, although they are involved with like fast tracks and things. We coordinate with them. It's like going to the dentist. It's not. Hopefully there are no rail folks sometimes. Extraordinarily not the easiest folks to talk to, but our goal through the process is try to just break down those barriers through other physical improvement. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. You know, when the valley, when they actually, for some good fortunes, when the valley was able to consolidate those rail lines, and I tried to trace back the history on that to understand how that actually happened and who paid for it. And it's extraordinarily complicated, and I heard that the railroads actually paid for a part of it, which I'm astonished to hear. And I think it was just a collision of events at that time. That's highly unlikely nowadays to get them to remove. So therefore, we look for other ways to kind of bridge those, bridge those corridors, such as pedestrian bridges or bicycle bridges, and underpasses that we're talking about potentially in Leary, Swansea, and stuff like that.
Well, I think careful density, planning density, like for example, there's the first stop out of Union Station for the North Metro will be in Elyria at the stock show on like 49th and 50th and Bryant. And I see that as a densified neighborhood. To make that a true TOD, I think you need TODs can have all kinds of identities. They could be an employment center, a recreational center, a residential center. But I see them it being a residential center, and that's room to go dance like 4 stories, maybe even mid-rises or something. I think you have to think about this.
I would just caution, I mean, I agree that we have turned it back on the river, and the valley's one of the best areas, the collection of parks to show off and become an amenity, but you have to be cautious a little bit about 2 things when you think about just getting rid of industrial for some sort of residential population growth piece. If we had said that 20 years ago, potentially River North would not be what it is today. Because you could have said that same thing. So I think you have to be a little bit more thoughtful and selective on where you go about doing that from kind of a planning point of view. And then secondly, I think nobody wants to address the big elephant in the room when it comes to industry and jobs, to understand that. Sure, it's easy for them to say, well, we're going to address our housing, which is accurate. Okay? What then happens, where do we all work when we move all that industrial base? And we talk about social equity, right? Isn't social equity about a variety of different industrial sectors with a variety of different employment levels, okay, that are in close proximity to residential neighborhoods? And with the way the industrial sectors are transforming, it's not the same type of heavy industry that we dealt with 50 or 100 years ago. So I think there are new models of districts, and this is why Rhino is kind of interesting in that way. It's kind of an exquisite Frankenstein in that sense, that I think causes one to pause a little bit from kind of where we were 15 years ago and say, okay, we're just going to get rid of industrial and go in with the new urbanist kind of gentrified valley. Because I would hate to see that everywhere in the city. I think there was a spot for it that's worked well and it was great for the city. I think if you replicate that up and down the valley, it would not necessarily make for the most interesting city over time.
Well, listen, thank you so much for coming out. It's a great gang. I really wanted to thank all of our guests, Todd, Tangier, Drew. Thank you so much for coming out. Tune in next month.